afternoon. Good afternoon. I hope everybody is doing wonderful and well. I thought we would talk about some of the history of tattooing today. Go over some of the archaeological records of tattooing. Probably more than anything else, going over some of the archaeological records of tattooing. And discuss kind of the meaning and what that does for us and, what that means for different people. There's a lot of, especially on TikTok, confusion of information going on a lot of the time. We see that there's a lot of people who are utilizing different markers from cultures that they don't belong to try and connect to a culture that they might have connection to, which trying to connect to a culture that you have connection to is absolutely an amazing positive thing to do. It's also not a very amazing positive thing if you're taking from other cultures to do so. And so we see a lot of conversation going on across TikTok. And I don't think I've really seen it as much on other platforms, though I think I have seen it a little bit. And so I wanted to give us a little bit of understanding as what it looks on a global level and in a forum that questions can be asked and that we can actually have I can answer things that might come across with it. Seeing as I've done some videos on it, but sometimes the videos don't come out and things like that. I also need to do a video that actually goes over like different ways that you can alternatively do things and different ways that you can try and do what you're trying to do without actually making it, something that is problematic for other cultures that you might not be a part of, right? So, with that, I'm probably going to be working most from a book on the archaeology of tattooing. Yeah, well, let me do that. I wanted to set and I forgot to before I come in, so it's not going to work. Okay, so the book that I'm going to be using today is called Ancient Ink. It is the most recent information on tattooing across the globe in an archaeological standpoint. Hello, gorgeous. It is edited by Lars Krutak and Aaron Dieter Wolf. And there are different information points about that they've grabbed from different space and included it in, and that's why it's edited. So it's edited and compiled. All that information is gathered. All that information is put into a book by them, and that is why it would be considered edited instead of written by them, right? And so there's a lot of importance in taking a look at the archaeological records that we have of tattooing across the globe and what those archaeological records of tattooing across the globe mean, especially for people who are working hard at doing reconnection, who are trying to, be a part. And especially if you want to do things that might utilize tattooing without doing harm to other people, right? It's to me extremely important myself that when I utilize things that I make sure what culture they come from, so that I'm not using something that might not be might not identify me right to my ancestors or to other people, right? So if I am trying to connect to my Celtic ancestry, then when I'm connecting to my Celtic ancestry, I want to use Celtic things to do that connection. Otherwise, my ancestors aren't going to hear me. This is one of the reasons that a lot of people will talk about speaking your ancestral language, because when you speak your ancestral language, your ancestors understand you better, right? Most of our ancestors don't understand English. In fact, all of us have ancestors, if we go far enough back, that do not understand English. And so if you're trying to speak from an ancestor from 1,000 years ago, English is not a language that was around 1,000 years ago, really. Like there are people on the island of England who are speaking Anglo languages or Saxon languages or Celtic languages, right? Anglo and Saxon languages both being Germanic languages, right? So because English itself is one of those languages that really doesn't even come into play in merry old England until much later, isn't even spoken in the court until much later. And even when the Normans are coming in and conquering England in 1066, the language of the people is not a common language. It is not English, right? And so when we're looking at that, it's important to understand that when we're talking to our ancestors, I liked Belisha. I was like, wait, is that an ancient name for English? Huh. But when we're looking at trying to speak to our ancestors, trying to find languages that your ancestors might have spoke is really important because it imagine that English is your native tongue and you've moved to another country that does not speak English at all. And it's been a decade since you heard anybody speak English, right? Imagine the relief you feel when somebody walks into a space you are and starts speaking English. It's your native tongue. It's the tongue that you were born with, the tongue that you were raised with, your first language. You understand it. You think in it sometimes, right? Even still, after a decade, you're still going to be thinking in it sometimes, right? So, having somebody come in and speak to you and being able to interact on a level, right, that feels familiar to you is hugely important. And it's the same thing when it comes to our ancestors. So if you have spoken ancient Irish Gaelic, right, and you were speaking Irish Gaelic when you died, and it's several hundred years after your death, and now everybody around you, all of your descendants are trying to speak English to you. First of all, you're like, them bitches fucked us over. Why are you speaking that shit? Right. And second of all, they aren't as able to understand, right? They're not as able to hear. It won't draw them as close. It won't make them feel as comfortable. It won't make them feel as secure. Yet if you were to speak to them in Irish Gaelic and try and take it as further back as you can, even, right? Then speaking to them into that Irish Gaelic is going to give them the ability, thank you, it's in curlers, it's going to give them the ability to like hear better, feel comfortable, feel there, feel part of you, right? Um, and absolutely, we do need to understand that even things like Irish Gaelic or Cumric or even Sami or Swedish or all of these different languages, they are evolving as we evolve, as we adapt, as we evolve. These languages evolve and adapt, right? And so there are still going to be things that aren't completely familiar, and that in itself is okay as well, right? It is still going to the lyric of it, the way that it trips off your tongue, the way that it sings is still going to feel more familiar than a totally different language is, right? And it's still going to be something that sings a little bit closer. So the same things happen when we're dealing with what things that we burn when we're using air cleansing. Do we light candles on an altar or shells from a space that your ancestors were from or different items that might speak to your ancestors specifically, right? And when it comes to our bodily adornment and the way that we're trying to adorn ourselves in reconnection, those things will speak the same way. So, my Irish ancestors, my Celtic ancestors from all, because I have a lot of Celtic ancestors from many different spaces, right? I hope that they recognize the Ogham and recognize the medicine. It's in Irish Gaelic, it is written in an ancient language, and it is talking about being effective for community. It's speaking out, it's stepping up, it's doing something, right? And so I'm hoping that my Celtic ancestry, on all of my branches of my Celtic ancestry, are able to look at that and go, oh, our granddaughter, she is speaking out. Our grandchild, they are speaking out, right? And so when we're doing those things, it's important for our connection that we're connecting in a way that actually speaks to our ancestors. This is one of the things that when we see people trying to connect to their ancestry, but in yay, trying to connect to their ancestry, but they're taking things from cultures that they do not have ancestry in, this becomes problematic. Now, first of all, I want to say that I recognize being an extremely globally mixed human being. I recognize that there are people out there like me whose ancestry is a multiple, right? They might have ancestry from the Celts, and they might have the ancestry from China, and they might have ancestry from North Africa, and they might have ancestry from South America, right? So I recognize that many different people like me have ancestry from many different spaces. And I recognize, and I know that everybody else who talks about these things that I have heard at least recognizes that when you are intersectional in yourself, right? When you yourself are an intersection, then the way that you pray, the way that you interact with your faith, right? The way that you do all of those things is really important and really personal. So, like, I won't teach people how to interact with the ancestors in an indigenous way because of the fact that my interaction with the ancestors is indigenous from many different areas. And so I can't tell you that this is, I can't even remember on some of them. Some of them I can, but I can't even remember on some of them which ancestry this comes from, right? Which part this is from, right? What I know is where it comes into my space, right? I know that this sings to one of my ancestral groups, right? And because I know that this sings to one of my ancestral groups, I use them, right? And some things do call to you. It's important, though, when some things do call to us, that we ensure that we're not. The chin line and tattooing is one of those things. It's just really a big thing on TikTok right now, right? Um, so if the chin line calls to you, but you're not somebody who is ancestral or descendant from or a part of a nation that uses that chin line, then taking that chin line, whether it calls to you or not, is inappropriate, right? Um, and this is because of what has happened with that chin line. This is because of what has happened within, different things. Um, yes, except for some people use tattooing as part of practice, right? This is to me part of practice. This was put on as medicine, and it's part of medicine to me, right? So yes, I agree in practicing, not appropriation, right? And I do agree with what you're saying about singing to you. Singing to you, and I've talked about this several times. Really, it's a lot about what sings to you because that's going to connect you, right? Um, I just want to make sure, because I am not on a platform that is, or I'm not sitting here only talking to people to have that understanding already, that I make sure that there is clarity in that understanding, right? That um, uh, when something is singing to you, if it is not something that you know you have connection to, it's not very appropriate to utilize it in a way that people who have connection to it might be harmed for utilizing it. Maybe that's the best way to put it. So, like with the chin line, people have been harmed for utilizing that chin line. So, if it sings to you and you put it on, but it's not something that you have an ancestral connection to, then what you're doing is utilizing something that sings to you that you have no ancestral connection to, that people who have an ancestral connection to get harmed for. And that's where the problem can come into it, and make it a different thing, right? And we talk, and I've seen a lot of conversations talk about appropriation and appreciation. Appreciation is important, right? Appreciation of other people's culture. That's why you can wear Turtle Island Indigenous earrings. If you go and buy Turtle Island Indigenous earrings from a Turtle Island Indigenous creator, and you wear them, but motherfuckers with pride, look, like, if you are, if somebody were to, if somebody were to give you a fan, like an Indigenous fan, right? A Turtle Island Indigenous fan specifically. Stop, Bran. If somebody were to give you a Turtle Island Indigenous fan, having that and utilizing that and putting that on your altar is appreciation. Somebody who was Indigenous gave this to you. Whether you have Indigenous connection or not, somebody who does have that connection gave that to you and wanted you to be a part of it, right? Wanted you to utilize it. They didn't give it to you for it to gather dust, right? That is appreciation. Um, if instead somebody gave you a fan and you look at that fan and you go, I could make that fan, and you start making that fan and you start selling that fan, or you start making that fan and you start giving that fan away, or you start making that fan and start utilizing it in a manner that it's not supposed to be utilized in, that becomes appropriation, right? So those are things that a lot of people have a hard time really grasping, is that there is a difference between appreciation and appropriation, and that appreciation comes from appreciating the people who are actually a part of that, right? And who are, like, buying from indigenous creators, or if you want to wear specific patterns and braids in your hair, going to somebody who that is their culture and making sure that they're paid for it, right? Um, and making sure that there is actual appreciation of the people whose culture that it is that's going in. And just wearing something that has no connection to a culture, or that might have been appropriated from a culture, even if it's appropriated by somebody else and you're wearing it, um, is not appreciation, right? It's participating in the appropriation, right? And there are many different nations that do not have close practice, um, or do not care if people participate. I would state, though, that even within some of those places, like, I do know that overall Celt is not like one of those things that, it's open, right? Yet I also know that there are people out there who are connected, who would tell you that, please don't utilize this without being taught how to, right? This has to do with ceremony, and you should learn from somebody on how to use it, right? Yes, appropriation is stealing the aesthetic that the marginalized group has been stolen, mocked, bullied over, right? Um, and stealing the aesthetic, right? Stealing it. It's not being given it, because if it's something that you're given, it's something that you're given, right? Yet if it's something that you're taking from somebody, if it's something that you're stealing from somebody, if it's something that you are, doing things with that might not be done in the proper way. So even, like, say somebody gives you a ribbon skirt. A ribbon skirt is something that, like, my ribbon skirt, I wear my ribbon skirt. It might have frozen. I'm sorry. I wear my ribbon skirt if I'm going to go to a powwow. I wear my ribbon skirt if I'm going to go to some form of a ceremony. Is it still frozen? I know that my internet is often spotty and icky. It is also going over on YouTube if it's easier for you to watch it there. Sometimes it doesn't freeze as much over on YouTube, right? And if you're missing things, it's also something you can go over on YouTube. So if like, I have my ribbon skirt, and my ribbon skirt was a gift. I am indigenous. I have made ribbon skirts before, yet my ribbon skirt currently is a gift. My ribbon skirt is currently a gift from somebody who I know from Standing Rocks, and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful activist, amazing human being. My ribbon skirt is a gift from them. So if I'm wearing my ribbon skirt, I wear my ribbon skirt for powwow. I wear my skirt when I'm dressed up, like if I'm looking nice, like if I'm going to go to something that my connection matters, and that I'm dressing nicely for a ceremony, and I'll dress up and wear it on a front line as well. Like, my ribbon skirt, I modified it a little bit so I could wear it walking. And so I have my ribbon skirt is slid a little bit up the side, so that when I'm walking and when I'm standing a front line, I can wear my ribbon skirt. The first night that there was a formal protest here in Portland in 2020, the first, like, actual, we're out here supposed to be protesting, the one that all the big stuff really happened, I wore my ribbon skirt to that protest. We went out and marched, and we went out and stood lines, and I wore my ribbon skirt, right? Yet I would never take that ribbon skirt and wear it to a club. I would never. I was looking at my closet today. I'm dressing up. We're going out. Like, I've got my hair in curlers. We're doing something. It's a costume party. And I'm trying to figure out how to be a fairy. And as I'm searching through things, I was like, my ribbon skirt would look pretty. It's the right colors. But I'm like, it was like one of those brief, it's the right colors. And I went, yeah, but that would be utilizing something that's meant as formality and ceremony and love, and part of this culture, as a costume, which is not appropriate, right? So I wouldn't do something like that. And Auntie, where are you? So I would go towards PSU, where I went, actually has one of the best indigenous programs around the country, right? Um, though their medical portion isn't indigenous, it does work with indigenous studies on a level that's actually really, really deep. Um, Judy Blue Horse Skelton was running it. I don't know if she is anymore. Um, it really depends on where you're at. Um, and it also depends on how you want to do it, right? So, many nations or many like um, Indian affairs offices, like in big cities, or Indian health offices in big cities and stuff like that. If you're not in a state that has a local nation, like a local reservation, many of those places will have programs that will help you get involved in it without it being something that you have a financial burden for. Um, and then I would look toward, so I would start there. What different places in your area have those programs that can help you get into it without it being a financial burden? Those are both fields that are really, really actively recruiting Indigenous people within them now. Like, not like wanting more Indigenous input, right? Wanting more Indigenous people to have say. Like archaeology and anthropology right now is really big on how can we bring more Indigenous people in to have more Indigenous say, because this should be controlled by Indigenous people more. Like they should have more Indigenous input. And so uh, with those fields being really heavily moving towards having indigenous input more than having Western thought input, it's really, it would be very helpful, or it's very easy to get into those programs. So if you were to go to your local, and like I said, if you're in a space that doesn't have like a local tribal office because it doesn't have like a reservation, or maybe you're in a big city, you can go to your IHS, or your local BIA, and they will give you like financial ways to get into it. And then what I would look at is which places to go to will give you the best education on it, which ones are focused the most on uplifting Indigenous voices. Now, I know like PSU is one that's focused the most on, or focused here in the area, is very focused on lifting on Indigenous voices. Washington State U is, WSU is another one that is really focused on lifting Indigenous voices. Um, I don't know off the top of my head any others. I know that there are others out there. I just don't know off the top of my head names of others. And you definitely want something that's close enough that you're not like putting out money moving to do it, right? So my first step would be to go to the local, and I know like I know BIA and IHA are like really difficult to deal with, especially, I mean, IHA is just so, or is so problematic, right? I know, like here in Portland, we have NAIA, and NAIA, it serves our community in a lot of different ways. And if you have something similar, because it's not state run, it's not government run, it's not federally run, it's not even federally, like, or not even tribally governed through federal law, like giving this, you get to take over this. So if you have something like that in your local area, that's a really good one to go to. The other thing is if you look around and you're like, this college is really has a great anthropology department, and it looks like they're really focusing on Indigenous voices. I want to go here, and you can go into that college and say, I am an Indigenous person, and I'm looking for ways to come to school in these things. I'm looking for. Do you have somebody that I can talk to? And most of them these days actually do have people that you can talk to at the local office. Any place that has an Indigenous studies program is going to be amazeballs for you, because like here are amazeballs for helping you set that stuff up. So like here, we have the Salmon House as an Indigenous studies, or is part of the Indigenous studies program, and a lot of our Indigenous studies are done in the Salmon House. The Salmon House is Indigenous only focused, and there's an entire Indigenous communal center basically within the Salmon House and PSU. And the so you can go into that space and go, hey, I want to get involved in this, and I need to get involved in this, and there's people I can talk to, and they'll go, okay, so you can talk to this person, you can talk to that person. That would be my first recommendation, is just find out and decide, okay, so am I doing this, do I want a Western degree, or do I just want the knowledge within my nation, right? Because there are plenty of nations out there that are teaching these things without you having to get a Western degree as well, right? So maybe here we actually have nations that host digs, or not digs, but schools, like field schools that host field schools, and the nation will like have their people going to the field school. They'll invite archaeologists and anthropologists in to teach their different, usually youth, but the different people of the nation who want to learn. They'll have archaeologists and anthropologists come into this field school and teach, and they might have other students come into this field and school and teach, but some of them are specifically indigenous focused and only indigenous students, right? So uh, I would decide probably very first, do I want to get it involved in a Western degree, or am I trying to keep it within my tribal nation, right? Or within my nation's thought process. Um, and then if I want to get focused on getting a Western degree, then I would go towards, if you don't have a really good center within the space that you're at, like if there's not a nation's office within the space that you're at, or like Arnea or something like that, then maybe I would go to the college itself first, right? And just see which one, right? You know, which one is actually going to give you answers, which one's going to work for you. If you go to IHA or IHS or anything like that, or your local center, and they aren't, sometimes they can be very, like, especially like the IHA, right? It can be really problematic sometimes. So if you go there and you're not getting any answers, go to the college and get answers, right? Don't let their bullshit keep you down, right? But um, I would say though that those are two things that you should really absolutely do. We need more indigenous people in anthropology and archaeology. 100%, especially within Turtle Island. We Turtle Island's archaeology and anthropology should not be run by anybody who grew up in or is a part of Western thought. They are not digging up their own ancestors. And it's not okay when you're not digging up your own ancestors, right? So we really, really, really absolutely need a lot more indigenous people within anthropology and archaeology within Turtle Island. So if that is something that you have an interest in, please, please, please. If you, I don't know if we're actually friends on here. Let me go ahead and make sure that I'm following you back. If you message me, I think we are. Yes. Okay. So if you message me and let me know where you're at, I might be able to see what local might, not like not nation-wise, but like schooling wise and stuff like that, what might be the good place to go locally, or what might be a good space to go. So if you are comfortable with popping me a message as to where you're located at, then I might be able to give a little bit more direct help. Um, but those would be my starts otherwise, right? Just because A, we definitely need more indigenous people, and B, uh, I would definitely not, I would definitely do the least amount of payment to get that you possibly can, right? Like I would definitely make sure that you got enough care and support to get through that. Trying to work and go to school is horrific. I tried it. Just all of it. So definitely make sure that you're getting that care to go into it for before you start into it, right? Um, and then indigenous medicine, that's one of those things that you can do indigenous studies and you can do medical studies, but indigenous medicine is something that you're going to do more communal and local. It's not going to be something that you're going to find a lot in schools, though. We are starting to see some input, and we need way, 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 way more input, right? So if you are getting into that and can find a way to kind of cross those lines and kind of bring indigenous thought process into modern medicine, it would be amazeballs, and make things a lot easier, because modern medicine, I've worked in modern medicine and it's pretty problematic. But back to ancestral. I saw somebody asking something about the tattooing here with full body. So the only documented history that we have of full body tattooing within the Celts is with the Picts and the Pictones. These are two different groups, though genetically they seem to be the same group when we're looking at DNA. And the groups are documented as tattooing from their scalp to their toes. And they're documented as using a single needle, and they're documented as using the juice from the woad plant. And so they are tattooing themselves with woad. It is absolutely tattooing because they are using a needle and going in and poking that ink into their skin instead of just painting that ink on their skin. Though I am sure that there are also evidences of them painting their skin, or I know that there are also evidences of them painting their skin. And so I'm sure there's a combination there. Um, when we're looking at full body tattooing, across the globe, we do see that there is evidence of full body tattooing in many different spaces. Um, Most of this evidence that we're talking about today, this is there is some that is in modern cultural evidence, but some of it is also, or I would rather say that the at least half of it is based on finds from mummies, finds from prior to, right? And so when we're looking at things like there is a mummy in China that we've talked about before in the Tarim Basin that is a woman from like 5,000 years ago who has moons on her eyes and other tattoos on her face, like swirling tattoos on her face. I don't think the Tarim Basin mummy is actually in this book. But I do have links, I believe, to that on my website. And then when we're looking at like Otzi full body paint tattoos, but there's nothing on his face. When we're looking at the Pezrek tattoos, to my knowledge, I haven't seen anything that shows any tattooing on the face, though the rest of the body is not off limits. Like everything else has presence of tattooing, hands, feet, legs. And then when we're looking at the Greeks, and the documentation, let me find that chapter really quick. Within the ancient, like Athenian, the Greek and Roman thought process, we're again not looking at facial tattooing within there. We are looking at tattooing across the body, though. We do see some facial tattooing. Actually, this one is within that. So this is Bulgaria in the 4th century, and I'm going to show you guys this picture. This picture is a greave, which means it's something that goes basically on your shoulder as a part of armor. And if you can look up, let me kind of get it up close to the thing there. You can see that there's lines across the face on one side of the face. You can see over here that these lines only go over one side of the face, and that there's scroll work of leaves across. Those colors are great. Scroll work of leaves across the forehead. This is in Bulgaria. And then we see that there are terracotta figurines that are decorated again in Bulgaria. And these appear to have some facial tattooing as well. So these are considered to be evidence of tattooing on the body and tattoo work. I'm going to go ahead and bring this one up close. And you can see that there is some evidence on some of the faces. This one here especially has like little, I know it's really close over on YouTube. I'm sorry. I know that there are people over there watching, maybe not. Some evidence on here of some facial tattooing. This one looks like there's triangles underneath the eye. The eye is put on here with lashes, so it's female. And then there's triangles, or I would assume female, because that's usually what we associate. And then there's triangles, dark triangles underneath the eye. One of these has several lines from mid face to mid chest, right? They go like this, just several straight lines from mid face to mid chest here, right? And then they have this swirling artwork across the rest of their bodies. And this again is in Bulgaria. When we're looking at the way that these tattoos are translating down, we see that there are certain areas within those regions that are still using tattooing. We see that within the Balkan region, which is near some of the Greek and Roman. Let me go ahead and map it because, again, as I state all the fucking time, I am completely horrible when it comes to geography. Yes. Okay, so when we're looking at the Balkan region, this region is similar to where within the same region that you're seeing the presence. Well, they're kind of across the Red Sea or the Black Sea at that point. Yet, for the most part, when we're looking at, are they? No, they're not. No, Bulgaria and the Balkans are in the same area. I'm sorry, I was looking at the other side. So Bulgaria and Balkans are relatively in the same area. So seeing the translation down of those tattoos, you can see within like Bosnia and stuff like that, that you can see like modern tattooing that actually gets very similar. It is full body tattooing. There are chin tattoos within this area, though the chin tattoos within this area are not, they're pictures. They're like little flowers a lot of the time and stuff like that. Um, and so you can see that within this area that the tattooing translated down just like the tattooing translates down in other areas, right? So when we're looking at the Kazakh tattoos or Pazarak tattoos, I always say Kazakh. Um, we're looking at Russia. And so when we're looking at those tattoos, we're looking at tattoos that are extremely ornate animals. This is ancient ink. Extremely ornate animals. And when you go into like the Bosnian women, you can see some of this really ornate. There's no animals within the descendant tattooing in that region. Mainly, I would say because of the fact that you're seeing Christianization within that region. And when you see the Christianization within that within those groups of people, then the animistic thought process of the animals and embodying that animal spirit is going to go away. And so you see that the tattoos have a tendency to translate into mainly cross work. And that doesn't mean that everything is a cross. What it means is you're looking at tattooing that is you know the rune that everybody uses for Vikings. It's like that spiral rune, and there's this and this and this and this, and then there's these on them, right? And so you see with the Bosnian tattoos, the Christian Bosnian tattoos, that you see a lot of that is that it's kind of this. I haven't marked up this book with little tabs so much yet, so I kind of have to go back and forth. Um, but you can see that there's like this kind of multiple cross work within these tattoos with little florals added on or little leaves or stuff like that, right? We see that these can actually, be traced in the way that they're tattooing as well, as it comes down. So which one is this? I'm looking 5 to 15 to 15 1. Yes. Okay. So we're seeing that the tattooing tools and the implements that we're finding are staying relatively the same. These are a little bag with pigment in it, and the needle kind of sticks in the bag. Um, you can see here what the needle kind of looks like, right? Um, these are little dishes that you might use to mix the pigment. So if the pigment is and the pigments can be many different things. Um, if the pigment is ash from or char from things that you burn to make the pigment, so like Otzi's tattoos have different herbs in them that were burned and charred, and once they're burned and charred, you will take that and you'll mix it with water, right? So it becomes a liquid. One second. Uh, 1 second. Give me 2 seconds. I've got to do something. I saw a call come in and I can't take it, but I need to do something. Sorry about that. How fast do I type? Pretty fast, actually. I did secretarial work and colleges and everything else. And between all of it, I think I'm like 80 words a minute, but it's been a long time. So since I tested, but I used to be really, really fast. I think I've dropped actually. But I've got all these people who are trying to get a hold of me today, but they don't want to get a hold of me at the time that I am trying to get a hold of them. And like, it's weird. I actually had somebody try and call me 20 minutes before they wanted me to be there for an appointment. And I'm like, I had set my phone down for literally an hour and you called, or you texted and called 7 minutes after I set my phone down. And I went and took a shower and I ate and I did all the things that I need to do as a human being and came back. So I'm trying to make sure. And I can't, like, if I try to take the call, I'm sitting in my house. And if I try and take a call in my house, you can't hear jack shit I'm saying. So taking the call wouldn't fucking work. So uh so yes, with the Bulgarians, you're going to see it. You're going to see that it's translated down, and you're going to see a lot of the same tool usage used. And when you're talking about hand poke, so I received my first hand poke tattoo when I was about 16. It's not visible anymore. I received a dot right here on my nose, and it's actually like sometimes you can see there's a little bit of blue right here, and there's a little bit of a discoloration of the skin right here. And I received that tattoo. I was Islamic as a child, and then I was a member of an Islamic community, kind of in and out of an Islamic community when I was about 16. They all lived in the same complex that we lived in, and I was taking care of my niece as this live-in babysitter because I was on the streets and I needed places to stay. And the community, I spent a lot of time within the community. And so the women of the community, and for them, it's a beauty mark, right? For them, it indicates beauty and it's about beauty. And so they used a sewing needle and a pen, ink from a pen, and tattooed a dot in the center of my eyes, basically, like right here on my nose. And like every once in a while, if I look real, real close, because I don't usually look real, real close, I can still see a little bit of blue in the pigment there, or in the pores there. I can still see a little bit of the blue ink in the pores there. And then there is actually kind of a little bit of a discoloration to the skin, like it's a little bit of a darker patch to my skin there. Um, this was a hand poke tattoo that I received at 16. This is 30 years ago, right? And it stayed probably until I was late teens. It was semi-visible until I was late teens. Of course, I wear glasses, and so it's only semi-visible when I'm not wearing glasses. Um, when I started tattooing or getting my body tattooed, I went to a traditional or a regular tattoo artist in my like I think 21. My daughter was 6 months old. Um, and then I didn't get any more tattoos again until later on. Well, later on. I didn't start tattooing again until I was in my 40s. So my first was at 16 and it was a hand poke home done. And then my second was at 21. And then later it was, and all of them for me are medicine at this point. Like to me, anything that I get has to have extreme meaning and it has to be done as now. Um, I don't always have tattoo artists locally who do medicine tattooing, right? For me, it doesn't have to be that the person themselves, like if you're putting something on my body, but that's not your culture, it's my culture, right? That's okay to me, right? Like my current tattoo artist, I've never talked to them about their spirituality. I do know that their tattooing is for healing. Like they do, specifically, they will cover or do tattooing for post-op for transitioning, post-op for cancer patients, or for scar cover, right? For people who have scars or people who have done self-scarring, or self injury, they'll do tattooing specifically for that. So for them, tattooing is very much medicine, and for them, tattooing is very much a healing thing. Yet I do not think that they worship in the same way I do. Like I don't believe that the way that they faith is the same way that I faith, right? Not that I think that I'm pretty sure they're pagan, right? But not that I think that they're doing a completely different faith, right? But they're it's not like when we sit down that there's a lot of ceremony involved. For me, there is ceremony involved. For me, there is preparation. For me, while I'm being tattooed, there is mental state, right? Like it is for me, is about if I am putting prayers in my body, that when those prayers are being put in my body, that is prayerful for me, right? It doesn't have to be prayerful for her, right? But it does need to be prayerful for me because that is tattooing for me. And all of mine are original drawn, and all of mine are have significance and meaning, right? Like I have the one that I got at 21 is a white rose on my breast, and that is significant to me for my sister, right? It's also significant to me for the Druids because the white rose of or blue rose because it's a white rose of blue tips. It's also significant for me for the Isle of Anglesey. Now, when I get up to further, so these tattoos are significant to me in many different ways. So this here is a poppy. Now, I insisted that it had to be an orange poppy. This is my oldest daughter. My oldest daughter is 30, and my oldest daughter is a stone witch. She's an amazing human being. She is not my bio child. I didn't give birth to her. I got her when she was 3, right? And she's this amazing human being that have loved for decades at this point. So this is it goes down into the other tattoo for my sister. My other sister's tattoo is here. It goes down into it so that it's blending in this family line. But when I look at this tattoo, this represents within the triskel or trithought of the goddess, right? So this represents the maiden, and this represents the mother, and this represents the crone, right? We're looking at fresh, full bloom, or in full bloom, and then that last of the bloom, right? And so there's also triskels, 3 triskels within here as leaves within this one. Now, then it goes up into, and I got this for my daughter's birthday. She got for her birthday my birth flower, and the one that my earliest memories. My mother actually potty trained me in the daffodil fields in Mount Vernon in Skagit Valley. So because she was picking daffodils when I was a toddler. And so daffodils are important to me. So for her tattoo, what it is, and we put each other's favorite flower on us. For her tattoo is a daffodil, but her tattoo is a daffodil that's in 3 different stages as well to represent the maiden, mother, and crone. And her tattoo has a daffodil bulb at the bottom of it, and the roots are in a pattern of 9. This is to signify 3 times 3 times 3, which is a significant number within many different cultures. And it is also to signify her root within her mom, right? Because I'm her mom. So how she's rooted within, and to bring my ancestral roots into her. Again, we're talking about somebody who I've adopted. She's my bonus child, right? And so to bring her to my ancestry in a more significant way as well. And then again, it's like 3 different things. She doesn't have the triskels within her. She just has the 3 daffodils. Now, my younger daughter, but my first birth child, her and I got tattoos for her birthday last year as well. Year before last. Maybe it was last year. And when we did what she doesn't like daffodils because they remind her of my mother, and she's not close to my mother. So she got one of the other significant flowers to me. She got a rose. And she got a bulb for a rose and three different stages of the rose, so that we're looking at maiden, mother, and crone within the rose. She's also pagan. She's also, well, she's Celtic pagan, like I uh, taught her to be, right? And then when we're going up into here, we're looking at this has three different stages of her favorite flower, which is in honey, which is honeysuckle. And she chose orange honeysuckle. And it starts, I believe, yeah, we see the very initial honeysuckle, the just the very initial flower here going into a slightly open bloom, going into a full bloom. And so this arm is all going to eventually be my daughters and sons, like the flowers that relate to them, though I don't think my sons are probably going to get flowers tattooed on them in return. I'm also going to intersperse it with the kids' favorite Pokemon, and have like the grandkids' favorite Pokemons over here. But when we're looking at the significance behind these things, you can see that the significance behind all of my tattoos is multifold. The significance behind all of my tattoos are never single fold, and they're always done with a thought and a prayer of a thought of prayer, right? A thought of ceremony, a thought of invoking something within my life that is positive, um, invoking healing, and invoking a sense of self, bringing something out. So I have on my neck and on my ankle, I have Oam. On my ankle is step up, and on my neck is speak out. These are English words translated into Irish Gaelic words, and then after they were translated into Irish Gaelic words, they were written in Oam. And so they're original designs that I've done, and they're very ceremonial for me, right? First of all, it's about connection. It's an Oam. This is something that Celtic people have been utilizing for thousands of years at this point, right? And second of all, it is about I went through a significant period of time where talking was not easy for me. Now, I've always been an extremely verbose person. I've always talked a lot. I talk when I'm nervous. I talk when I'm not nervous. I drop pebbles for everybody. Um, During a period of time where I was highly abused, I stopped talking a lot. Most people would still probably think I talked, but I just didn't talk enough. Like, and I never talked about anything important because I was afraid. I was being punished every time I was truthful with people. And when I was being punished because I was truthful with people, and I don't like, you can tell if I'm lying, right? So it was just very difficult for me. And so I kind of stopped talking and I kind of blocked off. And in doing that, the speak out has to do with that. It has to do with you need to speak your truth, because if you don't speak your truth, then you're harming yourself. It also has to do with activism for me. I believe that I should constantly be active for community, right? I should be serving of community, right? Now, I also know that self care is activism, and I must take care of myself as well. And I've learned a lot of things along the way. But for me, not, but yet for me, there is something that is very important about being active for community. And there's also something very important about the fact that silence is violence. Letting people be harmed and not stepping up and speaking out about it is really problematic. And it's something that we see a lot of in this country, right? And I'm anti-confrontational. Like, I hate confrontation. So it's very hard for me sometimes to speak out when I see something, right? I try to, and I'm usually really good about it. And yet sometimes I need the reminder it's okay to speak out. It's okay to step up, right? And so these are those as well. And they are also there's a song written by Rising Appalachia, and the chorus of that song goes, step up, speak out, show up, get loud. Step up, speak out, show up, get loud. And there was a period of my time, or a period of time for me, where I was healing and I was having such a hard time. Um, Standing Rock was utilized against me when it came to my children. And so the act of speaking out and the act of stepping up cost me. Now, that doesn't mean that I shouldn't have or that I don't want to, right? But it does mean that it creates that fear. When you get punished for doing something, it kind of creates that fear. And when the punishment is extremely significant, it kind of creates that fear. And so as I was healing, I sung that over and over again, probably 2017, 2018. I sung that song daily. Every time I got on a bus, every time I went anywhere, I was singing that song. And so when I went to do OM, putting those words was hugely important on all of those different levels: ancestral, current, healing, community, and, prior healing, how to get there, right? And so that's, to me, when you are tattooing, if you are tattooing in any form of connection, it becomes important on many levels. You have to look at all the different levels, and you have to be significant about it. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody who gets tattoos needs to do that. So many people get tattoos just to get tattoos, and that's awesome and beautiful. Get tattoos. Identifying ourselves through tattooing our bodies is one of the oldest things that we have done. It is one of the oldest things that we have ever done that we are still here doing, right? We have tattooing implements that are 35,000 years old in caves in France, right? We know that painting our bodies with ochre and painting our bodies and our clothing and cave walls and everything else goes back 100,000 years, right? Using markers on our body to identify ourselves is as far back as our sense of identity. From the moment we have a sense that we have an identity, we start publishing that identity. We start announcing that identity. And that identity is announced in many different ways. Using color or pigment to ornate your body of tattoos. Our oldest evidence of actual tattoos on mummies is Otzi, and I do believe Otzi is roughly 32,000 BCE. That's on bodies. Evidence of tattoos on other things, like those statues that I was showing you earlier, are considered evidence of tattooing. That evidence of tattooing goes back much further. When we're looking at the ones that I was showing you earlier, I think that those are like 1,000 years older than that, but I'm not exactly sure. Let me pull them up back up in my little book so I can see exactly the timeline on them. 5th, 6th millennium BCE. So that predates that by about 2,000 years to 3,000 years. So that would be 3rd millennium BCE, right? Oh, 32,000. Yes, right. And that would be, the cave itself is like 18 to 40,000 years ago. And the strata in which the tattooing implement was found was early 30,000. I have to pull up, I've got an entire article on my computer because it was something that I have done papers on before. Um, and that is, I think it's 35 when I was reading it, but I can't remember exactly. It could be 32, it could be 27 because I kind of misplace numbers sometimes. We do see like this is Upper Magdalenian, so 11,000 to 10,000 BCE. This is called Woman with a Reindeer. And it's engraved bone found at the Lengrembasse rock shelter. Lengrembasse rock shelter. And this is considered evidence of tattooing too. So this here shows a woman laying on her back. There's a reindeer standing over her. There is like all these lines across her body. And this is considered, these are very regimental lines in the way they're put together. And this is evidence of tattooing. There's like, I think it's 2 sides. No, it's 2 different drawings. It's 2 different drawings. Okay, so the first one, this top one up here was done in 72. It's a drawing of the same artwork. And this bottom one was done in 96. And it's just two different artworks of the same bone. It's an engraved bone of I think I would assume that it's reindeer bone because it's women with reindeer, unless they're talking about that it's a reindeer standing over her. It does not specify the bone. We do have like this mammoth ivory found in 1895, which is dated to 26,000 BCE or between 26,000 BCE and 20,000 BCE. That is Gravation. This is a face. And the way that there's markings on the face are considered evidence of tattooing within that facial tattooing, basically. And then we have so that cave that I was talking about, the cave in France, is a Magdalenian cave. So the cave finding that tool within that cave is actually, in fact, that's actually the cave right there. So this engraved bone is found in the cave that actually has the earliest tattooing tool that we have evidence of. The Saint Martin d'Arbecourt cave, I believe, in the Pyrenees in France. So this is early Magdalenian, 15,000 BC to 13,000 BCE. And this is engraved bone plate with two sides. And so this top one is a drawing of the back of it, and the bottom one is a drawing of the front of it. And as you can see within this top one here actually shows two human figures. This is female with these breasts coming down, and these show tattooing marks here. And then you see this male figure here behind her with showing tattooing marks as well. Down on the bottom, we're seeing what looks like a bison. European bison are actually bison or European and North American. They started in North America, but they moved to Europe along with the horses and the camels. So here's a bison, and these are actually not tattoo marks. These are actually signs of arrows on the bison themselves. Facing page, there's an engraved pebble that is Upper Paleolithic from 10,000 to 8,000 BCE that shows. So a lot of our early figurines of humans are anamorphic, right? So this one shows what looks like to have a face of a bovine, but has the body of a human that looks to be a human female, because it looks like there's details of breasts here and details of a vagina. And there's all these markings. And so this is another consideration of markings. This is another early Magdalenian, same time period, 15,000 to 13,000 BCE. This is photographed. It's a limestone plate. It's photographed and then drawn. You can see that it looks like they drew not only the face itself without lines, but the face width. So if you're looking really close up here, you can see that the face on the stone looks like this. There's a face with a lot of lines that are coming across it. So this is what the face itself looks like in this image, right? And all of these have lines down across the face. So this is Macedonian Greek. And it is the head of a figurine, burnished red fire clay, black paint, as well as the pelvis and thighs of a sitting figurine. And these are both from 4,000 to 35,000 BCE in Greece. And as you're looking at this, you can see that there are several markings on the face here and several markings on the body here. Now, this does not mean you can use these lines on your face in a different manner, right? So, is it popping back and forth? Oh, my cam. Yeah, it's a little bit hard. I can on here. Yeah, sorry. I'm showing so much that, I should actually probably have my cam bigger. Sorry about that. So, as you can see with the lines on the face here, the lines on the face here on her chin are offset. So do not think that you can use the Inupiaq or different indigenous turtle island as Macedonian. This is different. This is not the same that you're seeing in different turtle island indigenous spaces, right? Let me go ahead and show you a couple of those others again really quick. Sorry about that. I didn't even think about that. So this is the woman with the reindeer, the two different drawings. And you can see it looks a little bit more rough than the first one. This one, it looks like they painted it or they put it on as a very concise thing. Now, whether or not this is artist interpretation, right? This is the engraved mammoth ivory that we were talking about. Actually, let's just do this. We'll just do that for now. It'll be a little bit harder for me to read you what you're saying, but at least this way you guys will be able to see better. So this is engraved mammoth ivory. And as you can see, it looks like a face with markings on it. This is the two figures of the crawling, right? Looks like it's a woman. Actually, even looks like there's nipples put here, right? And then you're seeing that there's markings on their body. And this, I assume male. It could be female. I mean, we don't see the chestal area here, right? And then here's the bison down below. And you can see these look like arrows going into the bison, right? And then here is the anamorphic figurine. And you can see that there's kind of like a bovine or maybe a deer head here. Obviously female for their thought process, right? And then all of these different lines. This actually around the waist and the lower back, we see this carry over into Egyptian mummies as well. This is something that we see pretty common, is this tattooing of the hips, the tattooing of the lower back, the tattooing of the lower belly, very frequently in women or in those who are female. This might be a fertility thought process, right? We're not exactly sure, but it could be. And then this is the one where it's the person's face. And as you can see, the face on the rock wall itself, and then you can see the face as a drawing with the actual lines incised across it. And then you can see the face without the lines incised across it. So, again, this is the face that I was talking about. This is Macedonian Greece. There's a face, and then that looks like shoulders, but I think they said it's pelvis and thighs. It is. Okay, so it's pelvis and thighs. So it's a face and then pelvis and thighs. This one is always interesting to me. This is Romanian. This is 42 to 4000 BCE. There's a male figurine here and a female figurine here. And you can tell when I pull it up which one's male and which one's female. The male doesn't seem to be tattooed, but the female seems to be tattooed. So these two figurines, this one's obviously male, right? Because male genitalia poking out there. It seems to have belts. Seems to have something that's belting. Now, this is actually, it looks like it kind of sticks out of the body when you're looking at the image, right? It doesn't look like it's incised into the body. This here, on the other hand, all looks incised, and this is full body, right? This is a female figurine that from the neck all the way down has these lines tattooed across their body. That again is Romanian and northeastern Romania, a fired clay from 42 to 450 BCE. This next one is from Kosovo. It's orange clay with traces of brown slip. right? So what we're looking at is painted on traces of brown slip on this person. So this is 52,000 to 45,000 BCE. And this is a full figurine. And you can see that there's artwork on the face and there's artwork on the lines. This to me almost looks like a skirt, but it could be artwork on the thighs, and this is indicating a female, right? This could be like the other one looks like a triangle for the vagina. This could be that too. And it could be that they have these marks on their thighs. It could be one way or the other on it, right? Um, So this is a storage jar. This storage jar has a bunch of lines in it, and it's an anamorphic storage jar. Again, we see a lot of our earliest human figurines are anamorphic, meaning that they have human characteristics and they also have animal characteristics, right? So here's a head, right? Now this could be, this could be a bird beak, or it could be a human nose, and these could be ears, right? But there are all sorts of incised lines across this pottery. We've talked before in here about, I believe, that the Lapita people, the Lapita culture is most likely the Maori culture, right? You can see within Lapita, and there's no Lapita artwork in here, otherwise I would show you, but you can see within Lapita artwork that the clay vessels or the clay pots Lapita use have faces that, and their faces are kind of like pushed out in the clay, like they're live, like they're 3D, right? And on those faces there is marking, right? And so to me, I can see that kind of translate down into the tattooing that we see within the Maori people today. And so for me, that I believe that the Lapita culture is older Maori culture, right? Which you can see that there are different cultures that have that facial artwork, right, within their clay vessels, right, that would show both the face and the artwork within the face, right? This other one here on the other page is Koros Island, which I believe is Athens, is Greece. There it is, circa 2500 BCE. So this is a statue. It's marble figurines, and these marble figurines have lines incised in them, right? And so these are considered evidence of tattooing within this community. I love this one. This is Swiss. This is 500 to 300 BCE. So we're not talking too long ago. We're talking like 2,500 years ago. This, to me, shows hands and feet with tattoos on them, and you'll see why. You can see here, this looks very much like a hand with little fingers, right? And this has lines across it. And the same here. Hello, beautiful. And the same here, where you can see what looks like little feet with little lines across them, right? This very much looks like 4 fingers and a thumb, right? With these line works across it, right? So, and that again is, that's indigenous Doanian ceramics, which is Geneva. So Swiss. So it's Swiss. So one of the indigenous cultures of the Swiss. I also have like a lot of stuff within here of ancient Turtle Island indigenous tattooing. I'm not going to bring the Turtle Island indigenous tattooing into this, only because of the fact that we're trying to look at different ways that you can follow your own ancestry without taking from Turtle Island indigenous cultures. And I know that there are a lot of people within Turtle Island indigenous cultures who are extensively studying these things and are able to show a lot of the different styles. I know people that can design tattoos based on 2 or 3 different nations that you belong to. So I know that there is a lot of ability to do that. I absolutely, if people would like that information, have no problem sharing some of that information with people who are learning for their own cultural thought processes. Absolutely, but I do not want to pass it on here. Um, just because of the fact that I don't want those to be utilized, right? Without it being somebody who is from that culture. Um, so as we're looking through these different tattooing implements, we do see that tattooing across the body is absolutely pretty global. Again, we must ensure that when we're looking at that, we're understanding. So we deal with symbology, symbolism, symbols every day. There's symbols that you're looking at in this video, right? There's a star up there. There's a this Widda. There's a heart with 32 next to it. There's a little human being right here next to the number 21, right? The words that you're typing in, these are symbols. There's symbols on the wall behind me. You can see little girls here, right? You can see words. This hand, the Black Lives Matter hand, is absolutely a symbol, right? These are symbols that we're dealing with all the time. Um, Symbols that identify are ancient. Symbols that identify people are as old as I was saying earlier as the idea of identity. We have been symbolizing our identity since we started having an identity, started understanding the thought process of having an identity. So it is very, there's not a lot in this about Celtic. In fact, I don't think there's anything in here about Celtic specifically, right? Um, the France stuff would be Celtic though, right? So anything, especially in Lower France, anything in Spain, anything like that, that's all going to be Celtic nations eventually. Like if they're not calling themselves Celtic nations now, their descendants are going to be the Celtic nations. So when we're looking at Bulgaria. Bulgaria is not Celtic today, yet the peoples that lived in that time when Rome, or in that space when Rome starts taking over the globe, are Celtic peoples, right? And because we're looking at peoples who, when Rome starts taking over the globe, are Celtic peoples, their ancestors in that area are Celtic ancestors, right? And so something like this would absolutely be precursors to Celtic culture within Celtic culture, right? So just like, um, just like we see that like the Angles and the Saxons were Germanic tribes, right? So they're coming from a Germanic area, so their ancestry is Germanic, right? So anything within a Germanic area is going to relate to Anglo-Saxon thought process, right? Just where we see the Bell Beaker people in three different places with three different genetic identities. The descendants in each of those places are descendants of that culture, right? They, unless we're seeing places like there are areas where the Gravatian culture seems to see a replacement of male genetics after the last ice age, right? That doesn't mean that they're not still the Gravatian culture through female genetics. It does not mean that they aren't carrying down to the Celtic culture within that space, right? So any tattooing implements that you find anywhere in Western Eurasia in the lower half, we're dealing with a land area that when the start of the Celtic culture comes to being, this is the Celtic culture land area, right? So, and anything in Western Eurasia, not anything, most of Western Eurasia, um, when the Germanic culture comes into play. And again, these are names that we apply to cultures, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that sometimes they didn't apply these names to themselves, right? And sometimes, like we call the Gravatians. We don't fucking know what the Gravatians call themselves, right? Um, but if you're in a space where your ancestry is like somebody in France, somebody in Paris was most likely descended from the Parisi tribe, right? The Parisi nation of the Celts, right? This is the area that we see the Parisi in. This is the area that we see the genetic descendants of them within. And so well, you're going to see that that area might have gone through a Gravatian period and a Bell Beaker period and a Celtic period. Yeah. Well, so Celtic symbols specifically, right? From the time period of the Celts, no. And things that we specifically associate with Celts, like the Triskel or Ogham or things like that, absolutely, we're not seeing that. I don't have anything in here that is during the age of the Celts, like during the timeline when people who would have been called Celts were alive, right? Everything pretty much predates that, right? Um, Though again, like if you're looking at the descendant cultures, some of it might carry over, right? Um, I mean, honestly, if I'm looking at this being in Bulgaria in the fifth century, right? Just because it's in Bulgaria doesn't mean that, like it wasn't a Celtic culture at one point, right? Or, later on, right? But if you're looking at this, some of this actually could translate, right? Like some of the swirls and the markers, I look at it and I go, well, that's a lot of swirly stuff. That's pretty Celtic in thought process, right? Yet the specific Celtic symbols that we see, no. Other than if you're looking at like and this is also in Bulgaria. This might be something that you're looking at and you're like, okay, that looks similar, right? Or that looks like it would translate down, like the leaf work across the top of the head, right? This leaf work here. That looks very much to me. Thank you so much. This looks very Celtic to me, this leaf work here, right? And then when you're looking, so these are all animals that have markings on them. And so they're all associated with the idea of tattooing these animals. And these were found, they're horse trappings, right? They're heraldic imagery, meaning that they're supposed to be identifiers, basically. And this all looks like you can see some very similar to Celtic imagery within this, right? A lot of times we'll see like Celtic horses or boars, which have this heavy swirl design within them, right? Um, and so some of this is similar in imagery, yet it's not like a direct evidence of the Celtic nation themselves or Celtic nations themselves. Now, of course, I have pictures of interpretations of Roman interpretation of Celtic artwork on bodies. I actually have, and I did this one recently. So let me see if I can pull this up. One second. I did do it. Why not? No. Ooh, yeah, no. Let's see if I can. Here we go. Now, this is a modern rendition, but this is something that is often associated when we look at. Nope, it's not going to do it like that. It's only going to do it like this. Okay. Something that we see many ancient, many older nations actually, when they're depicting the Picts, they do this. So we see that the Romans, when they were depicting the Picts, actually were depicting the Picts very similar to this. And so we do see some artwork and some drawings. Some of them, it's hard to decide whether or not we're looking at actually the Romans did this artwork, or so it's contemporary to the people, or if it's something that is done later, right? So it's a little bit interesting, right? Um, Even in like rune stones and stuff like that, we're not seeing any anamorphic stuff. So will we see the artwork? We're not seeing the artwork demonstrated on an anamorphic figure when it comes to the Celtic peoples. Um, so, it's a little bit harder with that, right? A part of the reason that's a little bit harder than my live is just not doing me today, right? Like it is just not today. Now we have like this big black thing down here. Um, Even when we're seeing like the Celts, so I would say that a lot of this is probably the fact that most of the Celtic stuff has been dug up, right? Like it's already been like screwed with, right? Because of the way that so people went around digging up artifacts before even archaeology and anthropology, right? And when they go around digging up, oh, that's why. When they go around digging up artifacts before archaeology and anthropology, even, which again, early archaeology and anthropology is such grave robbing, right? That's all they're doing is they're robbing graves. When you're looking at these early artifacts and this early digging up of stuff, what you're looking at is groups that are finding things for fun, right? They might even go and dismantle an entire abbey or an entire holy site just so that they can take all these pieces home with them, right? So when you're looking at, and then we're also looking at a space that became heavily Christianized. So anything that was associated with the pagans that came before the Christian thought process is really getting, overthrown or eradicated or smashed to pieces or scratched out of things, right? So this is one of the reasons that it's really hard to find a lot of information these days within Celtic spaces still, right? Rune stones are one that we have a tendency to get, right? Rune stones or Ogham stones, right? Have a tendency to get because they're a little bit harder for people to destroy. I mean, they can deface them a bit, but they can't like you can't figure out how that person translated that 8-ton stone so you're not moving that 8-ton stone, right? There are some things that are still a little bit capable, but most of them are not things that are small enough to carry with you, because most of the things that are small enough to carry with you are already have going to been taken by somebody and disappeared into somebody's basement or been destroyed or things like that. So that's probably one of the reasons that we don't have a lot of statuary from Celtic people, or a lot of like I can't even think of like pottery from Celtic groups. Like I can't even think of, and that does not mean it's not out there, right? It means that I haven't seen it or found it. Um, I still can't think of, like, from what I know of the finds that we have from Celtic people, we're finding grave goods, we're finding belongings, right? Um, uh, in some of the graves that we're finding now, right? And in some of the graves that we found before that we were able, to actually keep a hold of after like the mid 1800s. Um, so there's some mirrors that we found that the backs of the mirrors might have anamorphic designs on them. Um, there is a couple tafel sets that might have anamorphic figurines associated with them or anamorphic images with them. Though I can't think of them, I just would say that those things typically have anamorphic designs on them, and so it's possible that they have anamorphic designs. We might have found a couple of, so makeup is something that's really global, really early on. And when makeup is global, early on, you get a palette, basically like this little dish. We were showing one earlier for mixing inks, right? This is the same style of dish that we see being used for mixing stuff within the ancient, all the way back to Neanderthals, right? You have something that's got a kind of shallow depression in the middle of it. And this is something where you're mixing your pigments, whether you're using those pigments to color clothes or cave walls or body or tattooing. It's a pigment mixing area. And so we have them in ancient Egypt as well. And the mummies that we see there, we see them in burials across the globe, right? And so they're just basically little shallow palettes that we associate with makeup wearing. And what it is you take that little shallow palette and you mix your pigments there and then you apply it to your body. Um, and so something like that is seen in many cultures to have different anamorphic designs on them, or different, sometimes even human designs on them. So are we frozen? We might have frozen again. Let me do this. Let's see if that will help us if I pause it and redo it. Now let me double check that yeah, okay. Went to double check and make sure that it wasn't like trying to pull from my outside internet and my inside internet. In like the ink or the makeup palettes that we have, a lot of times in many cultures, those will have human faces on them, or human bodies on them, or anamorphic. And so you might see it in something like that. To my knowledge, we don't have any mummies from any Celtic areas. Um, that's probably because of the areas, like, right, like it's not really a mummifying the body area, right? The bog bodies, I don't think so. If there is tattooing on the bog bodies, which there may be tattooing on the bog bodies, we haven't distinguished it. That doesn't mean it's not there. We've talked before how bodies, when they're exposed to the air, actually, if they're mummies that have been buried, or if they're like bog bodies that have been buried, when they're exposed to the air, they change tone, right? They tend to darken. And when they tend to darken, a lot of times tattoos are missed. The Pizarrak tattoos are something that they only knew of like half of them until recently, when they started using UV light and stuff like that to see them. Same thing with Egyptian mummies, is where they started using light to look at them, right? Um, some of y'all were. So it's possible that the bog bodies have tattooing on them, and then they need to be exposed to like that ultraviolet light, or the light that they're using to show the tattooing on the mummies in Egypt that they haven't been able to see tattooing on, but they found tattooing after they exposed them to this light. Or the Pizarrak mummies are the same thing. So the bog bodies, it is possible, right? If they because of the way that the interaction of oxygen happens when the skin actually hits air again after a couple of thousand years, it actually darkens it. And so a lot of the evidence of different things on the bodies is lost. And they are starting to look at those things now. So it is possible with the bog bodies. I'm just trying to think. I cannot think of any belongings that have been found so far that show evidence of tattooing. Um, Now, of course, we have documented evidence of tattooing um, from different groups who came across the Celts, right? Um, we have Celtic regions who have evidence of tattooing prior to the Celtic time period. Um, we have yeah, I would say that's all. That would be all that I can think of. Um, Again, that doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means that, because of the history of the way things have happened, it's quite possible in somebody's basement that there is an anamorphic statue from, you know, uh, 3,000 years ago in Kumri, right? Like it's quite possible. Um, it's quite possible that there's, gosh, there's even possibility that people have taken and preserved bodies. I mean, the Victorians like to eat them, right? They like to eat their mummies, right? So like there's even possibility that people have that, especially in places where you're looking at like generations of generations of generations of people who have lived in that same mansion or that same castle for like 2,000 years. There's possibly in somebody's dungeon shit, right? There's always that possibility that there are still things out there. We just have to get them brought to light, right? To this point, they haven't been brought to light, though. To this point, though, we haven't seen evidence of them. Again, though, I would state that when we're looking at the regions that the Celts were in, we do see evidence of that just prior to the dates that we consider to be Celtic dates, right? So, so our finds of Picts, right, within northern Scotland or within northern Britain are going to be, 7,000 years ago, right? That's things that we've associated with the Picts in northern Britain 7,000 years ago. The DNA has been associated with being Pictish. And so anything within northern Britain, after 7,000 years ago, that's Pictish stuff, right? The find of Cheddarman, right? Cheddarman's descendant is right there, right? I don't know when they trace Cheddarman's lineage, if Cheddarman's, descendants lineage is traced as Anglo-Saxon, or if his lineage is traced as northeast in Scotland. Probably, yeah. I don't know if his lineage is traced as, being Anglo-Saxon, or if it's traced as being Breton, right? The descendant of. I do know that Cheddarman's lineage, or his bloodlines, are what they call Northwest European, right? 13% of Northwest European has Cheddarman's bloodlines, has Cheddarman's mitochondrial DNA, right? Right. Okay, and that makes sense. So, but 7,000 years ago, was it all inhabited by the Picts, and then the Gauls came in, right? So that would be a question too, right? Like, so when do we see that the translation of this new nation comes in, and this new nation is like the one that now we're looking at, right? So the Bell Beakers, there's three places with Bell Beakers, and one is in Britain, right? Or in the island of Britain. And let me look if I can see where the actual that's quoted where, not Bell Beaker. Okay. So they have Bell Beaker within Scotland, and they have, or within Britain, right? And they have Bell Beaker within France, and Bell Beaker within Switzerland. Let me double check, because I don't know if I don't think I'm exactly right on that. So the DNA shows that the Bell Beaker are Celtic people, right? Like the descendants of the Bell Beakers are Celtic. Okay, right. So um his grandson is the one that I'm talking about that's alive today, like the one that is a mile away from him, 300 generations down. That's what I was wondering, if he like had like his lineage, like if he knew where he had come from, and if he had been there the entire time, or if like he has ancestors that come from out. So with the Bell Beaker people, there are many different spaces within the Bell Beaker population that are Celtic, right? But there are spaces within the Bell Beaker population that are not Celtic, and we've talked about the different DNA within the different spaces within the Bell Beaker population, right? Like the Swiss Bell Beaker population isn't necessarily a Celtic Bell Beaker population, but the France Bell Beaker population and the Bell Beaker population within Britain are Celtic peoples, right? DNA wise, right? So if the Bell Beaker culture is like 45,000 years ago, to what is it, like 65,000 years ago, then yeah, 45 to 65. So what we're looking at, oh, I'm sorry. No, before 45,000 down to 25,000. And so we're looking at a population that was probably Gravachian during the Gravachian period, right? When they're looking at the genetics, they do trace the genetics of the Gravachians into the Bell Beakers, right? So if we're tracing the genetics of the Gravachians into the Bell Beaker, and then the Bell Beaker into the Celt, then the things that are associated with the Gravachians and the Bell Beaker are associated with the Celts. They're the ancestors of the Celts. They're not from the Celt time period as we called them Celt, right? Yes, though this is also genetic, right? Because they're tracing that there are different spaces. Like, so the bell beaker population in Britain is associated with the Celts. Like their genetics are the same as the Celts. They carry the same mitochondrial and Y DNA as the Celts to come, right? So if my RH1, if RH1 and well, let's just go with the mitochondrial. If RH1 is a DNA that's associated with the Gravatians and then associated with the Bell Beakers, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, oh, and I think you said, oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So to me, and when we're looking at the way things translate down, right? So if you look at it's Prague. Let's look at the one that we were looking at that was um I'm in the wrong chapter apparently. So if we are looking at something that the Gravatians were doing, and then we can see that the Bell Beakers were using similar patterns, um, and then we can see that there's similarity between those patterns and the Celtic peoples' patterns, then it would translate down that. So specifically for me, if we're looking at these, this one here and this one here, I can see within these squirrels and the way these squirrels are here, this to me looks extremely Celtic, right? And this to me looks extremely Celtic. There's not a whole lot of straight line with any of this. There's a lot more of this curve, right? There is some where it follows the body line, but even here we can see that it's not a singular straight line. It kind of divides out and goes back in, right? And we can see that this kind of ornates out into kind of it's a little bit of a cross hatch, right? But then it goes into this kind of almost belt in the front where it's these swirls, right? That to me is something that looks extremely Celtic, right? Um, now, actually, I mean, I can even say that you can relate, especially this hip swirl. I've seen Celtic images that have this. It's a maze almost, right? And so, um, yeah, right. Um, well, and cross hatching is going to be something that's easy to do, right? So the swirls of lines in the it's much easier to do straight lines in a crosshatch than it is to do this and keep it steady and keep it in its exact, right? So it looks right instead of like if you've ever drawn a swirl, sometimes you like get them up on each other and stuff like that, right? Um, but there are none. I like oh God symbols. Like there's a couple of symbols that are specific that, but then just a couple of symbols that are straight lines, right? And even in those, it seems, and I can't think of all one symbol off the top of my head, but even in like the Ogham, it's not just straight lines. There's more to it. But not but, and you can see within that that a lot of it follows like this natural contour, right? Um, So I can see where you're going to use, and I can also see where early cross hatching might actually be an early example of knot work, right? Um, if you're looking at something like a knot work will kind of like a lot of times it'll have an anamorphic head at one end, or maybe it'll start with a triskel at one end, and then it will cross and it will have almost a cross hatch pattern. It's curved on the edge, but it has that cross hatch pattern through. And then it will go into another curved design, right? And so I can see something like that where you see that as early knot work, where it's got a curve on each end and then it goes into this kind of cross hatch of a knot work, right? Now, does that mean that it's the same people? We don't have, like, to my knowledge, this doesn't come from a grave that actually has a genetic person in it, like somebody to get DNA out of it in it, right? So, um, to my knowledge, can we say that absolutely, like these statues in Bulgaria, their direct descendants are, the Celts who then became Bulgarians. We can't, right? Or I can't off the top of my head, right? Um, but even within that, we're seeing that there can be some, and we were looking at it within these two, like there can be some similarities um, that are translating down. Um, I would still myself, if I was connecting to the Celtic specific ancestry, use symbolism that I know is, that makes sense. Well, and something that's crosshatched could be a bunch of X's. Could be not, right? You can't tell. It's kind of like, did somebody get their head stove in with a rock held by a human, or did the cave drop on them, right? So uh, if I am connecting to my Celtic ancestry, I'm not going to go prior to my Celtic ancestry to connect, right? So if my journey of connection is I want to connect to the Celtic side because I know that that's there, right? And I am looking at specific regions within that Celtic ancestry, right? Which many people are, right? Like whether or not they come from, like, they know they're Irish, or they know that they're Cymru, or they know that they're Scottish, or they know, or that their ancestors were, or they know that they're French, or they know that they're from the Iberian Peninsula, right? Or they're Pict, Tony, right? So if people are connecting to that specific timeline within their ancestry, use the symbols from that specific timeline. Um, Only because, again, if you're connecting to a specific space, you want to make sure that that space that you're connecting to has the right song sung, has the right tone, has the right limerick, right? Like has the right connection for your ancestors to hear. Um, if you are moving it further back in line, if you are trying to go further back in line, then you might look in those same spaces further back, right? Um, Yet it doesn't always translate to the same, right? So, we've talked before about how, like, we can see the tree of life in a lot of different spaces. We see it translated into a lot of different into a lot of different communities, cultures, right? Um, does this mean that we're seeing that for me, and I've talked about this one before as well, when we see something that is pretty translucent through a lot, or translating through a lot of different cultures, and something that or maybe like if a culture has all the same type of a single god, like the fact that most cultures have, or many cultures have, a trickster god, right? To me, these are things that carry back further in time. um, because we do all kind of start out, in the same space, and then as we're traveling out, we're taking these tales and these legends and these realities with us, right? So, the tree of life is something that's pretty transcendent of culture. A lot of them do have that. A lot of different cultures do have the tree of life involved. And so, uh, when you see that, you see the tree of life within South African cultures, and you see the tree of life within Turtle Island indigenous cultures, and you see the tree of life within Celtic cultures, and you see the tree of life within Nordic cultures, and you see the tree of life within East Asian cultures. And when you see the tree of life in all of those different spaces, to me, that's a story that we've all carried with us, right? From the start of us, right? So, certain things are going to translate down very alike, right? So, like, maybe the original tree of life is the baboa tree, right? It's a tree that was around with our, very start. And there's such a life to the baboa tree. It hosts so much life, right? And it gives so much life, right? So maybe the original tree of life is the baboa tree. Hey. And so within the space that the baboa tree is currently, and the communities that have lived within the space of the baboa tree, if the baboa tree, and again, like, this is the way it's translating, this is not a guarantee, this is a think, right? If the tree of life is the original, the cultures that remain around the tree, or the baboa is the original tree of life, the cultures that remain around the baboa tree are going to translate the tree of life down as the baboa tree. It's going to remain the baboa tree within that culture. If the tree of life within a culture that has moved to the Pacific Northwest in Turtle Island translates into a cedar tree, it is because the tree of life is a life-giving tree. Cedar is grandfather, and I'm not saying that the tree of life is a cedar tree within Pacific Northwest cultures. I'm just saying if it were to translate down as that and come to the point of being the cedar tree, you're seeing that they're taking the tree that gives life within that space and relating it to the histories that they carry in their bones, right? The histories that they've carried with them as they've moved. If you're going into Celtic spaces, you can see that the tree of life within most Celtic spaces is a completely different tree of life than the Balboa tree, right? It's also a completely different life than you see tree of life than you see within Germanic spaces, right? That does not mean that it wasn't the same tree to start. It means that as you're moving into a different space and as your community is adapting to that space and adapting understanding for that space and different ways that the tree of life actually feeds life in those spaces, that the stories of what that tree is are going to adapt. So the symbol for the tree of life within a community where the tree of life started is going to be the starting symbol that yet the symbol for the tree of life in another community is going to symbol completely differently, right? Now you might see that part of the symbolism will carry over, like within both Celtic and Germanic cultures, you can see that the tree of life has a tendency to be a little bit more circular when it's symboled, right? When it's drawn out, it becomes almost a circle of the branches and the roots almost touching, right? So that could be that there is that understanding that was carried from the point of the baboa tree, where you see the kind of roots kind of out the ground and blah, 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 the tree branches hanging down and out like this. So now there's this understanding of the circular nature of the tree of life. And that translates down into both cultures. And yet each culture still carries the symbolism of the way that it translates out differently, right? So, whereas the Germanic people might see that the tree of life carries all the nine worlds within it, to my understanding and memory, you don't see that same translation within the Celtic tree of life. Yet you can see both within the the Germanic visualization of the tree of life and the Celtic visualization of the tree of life. It is that more circular space, right? Um, you don't see nine worlds put into that circular space on the Celtic one, where you can find tree of life done in a Germanic tradition that have nine worlds put into it, right? And so when you're looking at something like the way symbolism for tattooing is translating down, hey sugars, when you're looking, I just saw your text come across. When you're looking at something about the way that it's translating down from like the gravations to the bell beakers to the Celts, right? It's not necessarily going to translate down in the exact same manner, right? If we're looking at something that might even translate down through two or three different cultures, right? So if in northwest or northwest Eurasia, we're seeing the bell beakers, and then we're seeing in southwest Eurasia the bell beakers, right? We're seeing what translates into two different cultures as they translate down, right? So in northwest, you're seeing a culture that then translates down into they both start out as Gravatian, right? Yet, or both start out as bell beaker, when probably were Gravatian before they became bell beaker. Yet then one becomes Celt and one becomes Germanic. And the one that becomes Celt is going to translate those symbols in a different manner than the one that becomes Germanic translates those symbols, right? We see that the crosshatch is a symbol within both. It means two different things within both, right? We see that there's a lot more line work within Germanic culture than there is within Celtic culture, yet we do still see a couple evidences of line work within Celtic culture, right? We see similar deities, not the same, but similar. And we also see those similar deities in other spaces. then it is. It's about adapting to your surroundings, 100. And that's really what it is. It is the adaptation to your surroundings, just like we were talking about with the tree. If your visualization starts with a baboa tree, but you move into an area that has no baboa tree, then your visualization becomes something else, right? Yeah, like Odin versus Wotan, right? So your visualization is going to become something else. The Odin and Wotan, Wotan isn't necessarily a Celtic god. It is more, we see that Wotan becomes a little bit more associated with people in the island, on the island of Britain, after we see the invasion of the Germanic people into the island of Britain. It's not necessarily that Woden is a Celtic god. It's more of an imposed god than it is a Celtic god, right? Um, and so you're going to see that as that's translating down, you're going to see the way that it's translating down is going to be about the space, right? Um, you'll see that people will become the people of the antelope, the people of the reindeer, the people of the salmon. You'll see that this will happen in many different spaces. I grew up among the people of the salmon in the Pacific Northwest, and yet my Swedish ancestors are also the people of the salmon, right? Locks. And salmon is actually a really huge part of my Swedish ancestry, right? So we're looking at two different spaces in the globe, right? That are both people of the salmon, because the salmon is important to their culture, right? Is important for their food, is important for, it's seasonal, so it keeps the seasons. It becomes a part of the stories, right? So you're seeing that this is many different nations or many different communities will have an not animalistic, animistic, um, um, not necessarily deity. Sometimes it will translate deity wise, yet more of a connection. We connect this animal. This animal is important to us. Um, and that's going to translate in different spaces to what is important in that space. So your tree of life could be hawthorn, your tree of oak could be cedar in Norway, right? Because cedar is a huge thing in Norway. It could be, it could be the Joshua tree, right? Whatever it is that is associated with giving life to your community, whether it's, many communities over the Stone Age use sap as a method of, putting spearheads into spear shafts, right? Or arrowheads and arrow shafts. So utilizing the sap from that might be part of utilizing life, right? See you later, McLeod. We are all animistic at one point. Animism is just believing that you're just part of the until we reach a point of believing in a God, we're all animistic. And even after that, many cultures, gods are an animistic God, right? Like many cultures, pantheons are animistic pantheons, right? Um, but until we reach a point in a belief of a deity, everything is animistic. One with the natural world, a part of the biome, just in their being here. And so when you can see that that symbolism is translating down, you can see where it might translate down differently in two different areas, where you might start with the exact same symbol and it's going to translate down differently in two different areas. So again, if you want to go directly to Celtic ancestry, you might look at that Celtic ancestry and take it back, 5,000 to 6,000 years in the area that you're at, and only go for that 5,000 to 6,000 years. And then if you want to look, instead of looking at the Celtic ancestry, say you're from the Iberian Peninsula and you want to look at the ancestry of the Pictonis in that area because you're Pictoni descendant, right? And so you're looking at the Pictoni ancestry and you're dealing directly with the ideas that the Pictonis had. And you've learned what you have from that and you've gotten what you want from that, and you decide that you want to take it a little bit further back, and now you're going to look at the Gravatian period within that area, or now you're going to look at the Bell Beaker period within that area, and then you're going to utilize what symbolism that you see within the Bell Beaker period. And well, maybe the Bell Beaker period doesn't have a lot of symbolism, or maybe you want to move it further back and you're going to go to the Gravatian or Aleutian period, right? Or the Solutrean period before you get to the Gravatian period, right? So um you might want to look at specific spaces in time for specific symbolism to connect to that specific ancestry first. Um, if you're not finding enough, if you want to have more information, if you want to go deeper, if you want to see if something may actually be a part of that and may not actually be something that's been given to that, like, or stated as that when it's not that, all of those are reasons to kind of go a little bit further back. Only because then you can see things like the curved lines seem to translate, right? And then you can see what symbol, like the leaf pattern on the forehead of that grieve, translates down to the leaf pattern within the Pictonies, translates down to a leaf pattern within early medieval Celtic art, right? Like, so, and you're looking at the way it translates down, you can absolutely look at it like that. I still don't see, like, during this specific Celtic time period, other than documentation of the ones we do have documentation of, I still cannot think of any actual grave goods that actually show these different, or at least that I have found. I'm going to look more into it, I think. I was just able to get Ancient Ink within the last month. It's like a $60 book, and it's one I've been wanting for a minute because of my interest in tattooing. Um, so I was actually hoping that we would have more information on the Celts and the Nords within it. And yet we don't. We have earlier, but not during those time periods, right? And so I'm going to be looking for more during those time periods as well. A big part of this is because I want to help people find ways that they can mark up their bodies and connect to their ancestry in the right way, right? So finding different things that can be utilized. I would state though that if you have things that you know are symbols that are associated with your ancestors, that it's absolutely, absolutely usable for tattooing, usable for um, identifying, right? Usable for making identifying parts of you, right? So the Triskel, and the Triskel is actually, you can see the Triskel in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. So if you're going, like, and I know like there's differences even between the Irish, the Gaelic, and the Cymry, and the uh, Breton, main isle, our mainland, Breton, Triskel, right? You can see, and so all Celtic nations that just have differences in the way that they're doing their Triskel. There's even differences in what it means. I've seen people that identify the Triskel instead of meaning like the mother, maiden, and crone, which is what I've always identified it to be, is birth, death, birth, life, death, rebirth. Like it's a spiral in that, or a spiral of spirit. Um, so there's some different ways that people will translate the meaning of the Triskel, and there are different ways that people will art the meaning of the Triskel. There's a Triskel within Nordic thought process that is three horns triskeled out, and it's associated with Odin, right? There is and there's also the Volknot, which is three triangles translated out into a Triskel pattern, basically, like they all overlap themselves, right? And it is, well, threes and sevens and fours, and eights. Those are all power numbers in different cultures, right? And you'll see 3 and 7 in many of the same cultures, and you'll see 4 and 8 in many of the same cultures. Um, and it's really one of those things that you can see a lot of repetitive thought process and a lot of cross-cultural thought process in. Absolutely. Um, for me, the power of 3 has always been really huge. That's something that I learned really young, though, right? And that's why it's always been really huge for me. And I didn't learn about the power of 4 until older, right? Um, you can actually see 4 in a few cultures on this side of the equator, or not equator, but in the Western Hemisphere. Um, and you can see 4 and 8 actually correspond. Um, West Asia, I believe, right? So there's a few different cultures that will actually have that within. 8 tends to be an eternity number, and so that one tends to be powerful. 7 is often associated with magic power, right? And 3 is often associated with knowledge, I would say would be the best way to put that. Like, um, so we see like 3-line stanzas that the druids would use. There's many different powers of 3 that would be used. And a lot of it revolves around understanding, basically, right? Understanding. Whereas a lot of the power of 7 revolves around like the seventh sun kind of thought process. This is where you find your ultimate power, whereas the threes are a little bit more about maybe connection is a better way to put it. Connection and understanding is a better way to put it. Um, so it can translate well. I am going to go ahead and take off because I have a lot of things that I want to do today, and I'm going to turn into a fairy by tonight. Um, I want to remind everybody some of the things that we talk about in here very frequently is the fact that we are biologically nurturing and communal. And this means that most of us are living in a society where it's the antithesis of our biological needs, right? It's the antithesis of who we're supposed to be. Um, and so this leaves a lot of us in a lot of pain and a lot of depression and anxiety. That's a very healthy response to a very toxic society. You're necessary and you're worthy just by existing. You're needed just by existing. And being aware of how toxic the society is part of the healing that we need for this society. So when you're dealing with the depression and the anxiety that comes along with not being a member of a nurturing and communal society like we are supposed to, our community, um, that awareness is necessary for change within us. So hang on and stick around because you're absolutely necessary and absolutely needed. And I love you all because you are all beautiful and worthy of love just by existing. Just by existing. I don't need to be able to take from you. I don't need to be able to exploit from you. I don't need to be able to get something from you. You're all beautiful and worthy of love just by existing, and you are all necessary. So please make sure you take that with you today. And please make sure that you give yourself grace, right? And I know I haven't been around all week. I tried to a few times, but I've just had so much stuff coming up. But I will try and get around a little bit more next week. Um, and do a little bit more. We'll do another one on tattooing, and I'll try and make sure that I can do it at a time where people are more capable of getting in to see. But we'll do some more on it next week. Take care, everybody. So much love to you all, and I hope you have a great weekend. Bye. And for you still on YouTube, much love, and I will see you later.